Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. We talked back in 2019 about his book on Stephen Port. The title of that book is The Grinder Serial Killer, The True Story of Stephen Port, an excellent book that I read. But today we're going to talk about his recent publication titled Leopold and Loeb, The Murder of Bobby Franks. And this book is part of a series on killer queens, but Alan's published many books and has been very busy. So he had some recent publications. One is Doomsday Cults, The Devil's Hostages, also Hannibal the Cannibal, The True Story of Robert Maudsley. Those are both 2020. Also The Killing Game, True Story of Rodney Alcala, 2018. Deadly Betrayal, This True Story of Jennifer Pan, Daughter from Hell, and many other titles. So you can check out all those titles on Amazon. And he is also the host and producer of the popular NBC News Talk radio show titled House of Mystery, which reviews true crime, history, science, religion, paranormal mysteries that we live with every day. And it's from a darker comedic logical perspective. He's interviewed guests such as Robert Kennedy Jr., F. Lee Bailey, Aphrodite Jones, Marcia Clark, Nancy Grace, Dan Abrams, and Jesse Ventura. The show is based in Seattle on KKNW 1150 AM and syndicated on the NBC network throughout the United States, including on KCAA 106.5 FM Los Angeles, Riverside, Palm Springs, as well as in Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. And Alan's website is alanrwarren.com. But again, we're going to talk about this book. I'd heard about this case, but he goes into great detail about it. So it's really a fascinating book. Again, the title of the book is Leopold and Loeb, Murder of Bobby Franks. So Alan R. Warren, thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being here.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming back. For people who didn't hear our earlier interview, may not have known your background, can you add to what I talked about, some of the books you've written? You've been busy recently, and then what led you to write this book, Leopold and Loeb?
Yeah, I've always got cases going on. I think I probably had this one and The Butcher of Hanover a couple of years ago when I was doing the Grinder serial killer. And it just takes a while to get the documents or the items or get a hold of people that have information that you need to use. So that's why, I've got things going. So yeah, both those books are out. The Butcher just came out as well.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I've got that, and I've got a paranormal book coming up, which I'm just finishing off as well.
Do you have a title for that?
It's just going to be the paranormal interviews.
Gotcha.
I believe that's all it's going to be called, and it's just kind of covering all bases of the paranormal that I've come across in the last, let's say, 20 years.
Gotcha. And that's also from your interviews on your show, is that correct?
Yeah, that's primarily the interviews on the show, and a few of them, it's a few extras where I've got interviews that were not live, but I made part of the book.
Gotcha. And so that's coming out soon. So you have this other one, Butcher of Hanover, Fritz Harman. I mean, can you talk about kind of the background of this story? It was the crime of the century, right? The Leopold and Loeb crime. Can you talk a little bit about these characters and their background?
Yeah, it became kind of the crime of the century. They were both from, well-to-do families. One of them was the Sears family, so there was some good, they were in a good position. They were well educated. They were both smart. Leopold's probably smarter or better, let's say better at attending school and learning and applying himself. Loeb tended to be a little bit freer and didn't care as much about his education. That's kind of how I would see it, because he would miss a lot of classes and he would go out and party, and so he wasn't as regimented, you might say.
Gotcha.
But both kids were well off, smart, healthy, and active, and they kind of had a weird relationship, because they sort of were together as a couple, but not really. And that's a really difficult thing to say. They were lovers, but not in a typical fashion that you would see in a couple. Like Leopold was fascinated with Loeb and wanted to be in a relationship with him. But Loeb would go out with females and tended not to be interested in a relationship according to himself. But yet he would get involved in it if he could get Leopold to do different things for him. So it was a really unusual situation. So I found that to be something I wanted to pursue. And that's sort of, and even the Fritz Harman book, both of them had unusual relationships that I don't blame on the crimes per se, but they're part of the reason why the crimes were committed.
Right. And would you agree? Because in my kind of knowledge of Leopold and Loeb, the kind of homosexual angle wasn't usually talked about in the past. Would you agree with that? Or is that my misunderstanding?
That's sort of, I try to make sure people that emphasize that in forwards and by prefaces that I think that it's important to realize that in the 20s, first of all, you would not look of homosexuality was illegal. It was a crime, and it was thought of very negatively. And so at that time, you wouldn't even consider being in a relationship, as we would call it. Like, you don't. It was something that was kind of hidden and considered dirty and dark. So it's not something like you didn't go out to a place and date or go for dinner, and you wouldn't plan out this. So a relationship. So it wasn't in your mind that when you went and had sex with another man, you weren't sitting there going, well, maybe, you weren't thinking of love, or you weren't thinking of it. Just, there was no construct. There was no such thing as that.
There's no such thing as like being out or anything like that. And it was considered psychologically aberrant. So they could put you in an institution, right?
Oh, totally. Totally. It depending on, what part of the country you were in and what you had done, but you'd either end up in jail or you could end up in a ward mental institute, or even castrated in some cases.
Wow.
So,
right.
So it was just not an acceptable. It was just considered an illegal bad behavior. And it was something that shouldn't be done. And so with that in mind, in society, you, as two gay men, you would not think that you would end up together per se. So this also might be why Loeb continued to see women and would date females and all of that in his life.
Right. So they had kind of different sensibilities, and one was very much influenced by Nietzsche. Can you talk about that influence and how it influenced their relationship?
Yeah, Leopold really brought Nietzsche in, and Nietzscheism is just kind of a how do you say it without getting too detailed? It's really kind of a philosophy by a philosopher named Nietzsche that kind of considered above people. You were different. There was different.
He believed in the idea of the Superman, right? So you're above all that, and
you're an overman.
morals.
You were sort of a premier. The Nazis really grabbed a hold of this philosophy. It became quite popular in Nazism as kind of a basis when Nietzsche was out presenting his ideas originally, and it wasn't a popular subject. He wasn't a popular philosopher. It wasn't until the Nazism came in that they kind of grabbed it, and they went with that. But the idea of you were a superior being, and so being that overman or superior being, you would not or could not be held accountable for things you did to people that were not of that same quality, let's say. So you're this Superman, so to speak, and you do something to someone that isn't. It's like almost like I don't want to say hurting an animal, but in the mindset, it's like you're sort of doing something to someone that doesn't really matter.
Right.
So
and that mentality was there in their relationships, and they had kind of a slave master sensibility, right? Wasn't Leopold kind of in his ideation wanting to be somebody's want to be dominated? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and that was considered in some of the psych reports at the time. Um, they considered him to be a person that was, he had this fantasy of serving a king or an overlord or somebody that was important, and he wanted to be very important to that person. He wanted to be the servant, or you say the slave, and he had that, and that was thrown around a lot. But I also say, and I hope people pick this out, that Leopold eventually became the person that was kind of controlling and setting up a lot of the situation. And I know I've already had backlash on this and a few issues with some people about this, but the reality was he was starting to set up what they did, when they did it, and where they did it. It was like he was conducting their relationship. So almost he knew what he was getting out of it, so he would set it up, so to speak.
Right, and they were kind of petty before this event happened, the big event. They were kind of petty burglars doing adventures, kind of illegal adventures together, right? Stealing stuff and things like that.
Yeah, Loeb had this fantasy, and again, it's talked about in some of his psych reports about what this was. But in essence, he really wanted to commit crimes. He wanted to do things that were bad, and he did. And they were small. You're right. It was petty thieving and stealing and small fires and just mischief. Nothing of large magnitude here. It was just a mischief sort of thing. And he was turned on by it. He was turned on by doing it. And so eventually, they were doing these small things together. And Leopold was offered a chance to have sex with Loeb every time they did this. And the bigger the crime, so to speak, or the more of a turn on for Loeb that this crime was, the better and the more, I don't want to say the better or the bigger the amount of sex that they would have. And that was kind of what was offered to him. So it was in trade. And so they both were fulfilling a fantasy by doing these crimes.
Right, so it was like building up to something that, and they were right. One was Loeb was the one whose dad was the vice president of Sears Roebuck, which at the time was very well off. So they're both very rich, very intelligent. I think they both graduated from high school early. People were saying I think Leopold was set to be a Supreme Court justice or something like that. Like they
Well,
had,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's predictable. I mean, he was in with the in crowd. They were in with the well-to-do, the upper echelon of society, both of them. So they were both set to have a good career in whatever they chose. And Leopold had already been writing documents, and so yeah, that's what I said. He was more disciplined. Loeb didn't take it as serious. He was smart. He had the money and he had the ability, but a lot of times he squandered it. He wasn't disciplined in his behavior, so it didn't show as well. But they both probably would have done really well in life if they hadn't gone down this path.
Right. So they started like having this fantasies. They ended up at what? The University of Michigan. That's where they kind of started plotting this whole thing, right? 1920, something like that.
Yeah, they started putting it together. Again, it was kind of it's debatable. I have conversations from both sides on who did what and who thought of things, but I would say Loeb was probably the one, putting together this scheme. You see, because like anything, when we do something and it gives you a thrill, then you want to do it again, and then you want to do more of it and something bigger. And this is the same sort of thing that they were doing. So eventually, theft and burglary and small fires and stuff were not enough of a thrill for Loeb. So he wanted to go further, and he wanted to plan what he considered to be the perfect crime or murder. And so that was kind of his idea. So he was doing a lot of plotting that way. Leopold was very bored with this. He knew that this was going to give him what he wanted, the ultimate pleasure of having sexual relations with Leo, but he found it very tedious and very boring, and he would go along with it. But after a while, you start to see he was just kind of like, oh, geez, So that's why I said he started actually initiating things. He actually started kind of creating events that they were going to do so that he could get it to move along. So it was kind of the perfect combination with the two of them.
So yeah, they're kind of playing off of each other. And how does this crime kind of develop, and what happens next?
Well, the idea was to kill someone, and it didn't matter who. This is another very important part of this case, is because when you quite often when you look at murders and there's sexual behavior, let's say, like especially when it was homosexuality back then, or even right up into the 70s, 80s, even now, people will automatically associate it as a sexual crime. There was a sexual reason, or if not that, then it's a personal reason, right? These people, there was no, they didn't care who it was. They didn't want to have sex with the body. They didn't have an intention to get someone who they didn't like, or it wasn't a typical style of murder. It was just the fact that they wanted to do it, and they would both get something out of it. So the idea was to find someone and to kill them. That was the basic plot.
Right. And so it's set in this kind of thing where they're wealthy, they're intelligent, one of them has this Nietzschean idea, which is kind of strange because I think they're both Jewish. So
yeah,
right.
Yeah, they're both Jewish. And not only that, Leopold had this a real like for Hitler. When Hitler was placed in prison for the coup attempt, what was that, in 1920, I believe, for 5 years, he was really upset with this. This really bothered him, and we see that in some of his writings and some of it. So he actually, it's strange to think that he was involved in sort of supporting that kind of concept. Meanwhile, he was Jewish and gay.
Yeah, really strange. And so they also I think you wrote in your book, like they were going through a selection process, and I think one of them selected one of their siblings. Like he could have been a victim, right?
Yeah, there was a few, but it just wasn't going to be right, because they wanted to, at the same time, make some cash out of this, and they wanted it to be, especially Loeb, he really wanted it to be something that made the headlines. He wanted it to be talked about all across the country or even the world. So it had to be someone. It couldn't have been the family members. It wasn't going to work out that way.
Right. So there was. So they really plotted it. They wanted to get some ransom money from somebody. So they really thought that they had a foolproof plan. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, in their mind they did, and for a lot of it probably was fairly solid in their planning. It's just like anything, but you're dealing with humans. There's going to be mistakes made, and you're also dealing in the public, so you never know who's where and what and when things are going to be found. And there was a lot of variables that they left open, but it was a very good plan.
And so what did they do? I mean, what happened? It was, I think the day Bobby Franks was May 21st, 1924 is when the murder took place, right?
Yeah, they right. And so they went out looking. The idea was to, so they rented a car and paid cash for it. And so that they wouldn't use one of their own cars, that type of thing, which is smart. And that's very detailed, because they would, back then, they would go to the car rental place, and they were setting up under a fake name, some sort of, you might say credit, because back then there was no credit cards. What you did was you would have a residence, and then you would rent something in cash, and then you would set up letters being sent to you and all this. It's just sort of some sort of references for you. And so they kind of did this, and it explains that kind of in the book. So it was thought out well, and it was a good idea. But again, there was some mistakes made. things they didn't plan on. I guess that's probably the best way. So yeah, they went out cruising in this rented car, and they looked for hours, and they just couldn't. They weren't finding the right person. They were. Yeah, so it took them a couple of hours, and eventually, when they were watching a baseball game, they saw Bobby Franks walking away from it. I mean, the game was over, and he was walking by himself, and he was umpire there, I believe, at the game. And so they went out, and so they cruised him a few times. Eventually, stopped, talked to him, and Franks knew who they were. He knew, they knew. Loeb knew him. They had been neighbors. They weren't lived too far away, and some of the parents and uncles and aunts had played tennis. And there's some story that they were cousins and stuff, but legally they were not cousins. That's all over the place, but they considered themselves cousins. It was kind of like best friend parents that have kids,
Oh.
So anyway, they got him to get into the car eventually. I kind of go through all that, take him for a ride, and then they kill him. They kill him and dump him in a culvert. One of the kind of unusual things was that they poured acid on his genitals and on his face and hands, trying to make the body unrecognizable, I guess, to make it harder to identify them, and to identify the body.
Right. So they're definitely thinking about it, trying to cover it up. It's a random crime. It binds them together. They get a charge out of it. So it's
yeah, it worked. Actually, it was a thrill. When it talked about their sexual relationship, and after it, they were thrilled by it. They couldn't be more excited, especially Leopold, which made Leopold excited because he was going to get to have sex with them. It's kind of crazy how far they would go just to fulfill their own pleasure, so to speak, not really be concerned about taking a boy's life. So it's kind of crazy, but you see so they did plan it all out, but again, it falls apart because someone found the body faster than they wanted them to be found, right? And that caused a problem. So, and then they were spotted as well. The plan about having the father throw the ransom off the train. So there was mistakes made, and they eventually got caught.
right. Wasn't their idea was that they sent a letter under a fake name to somebody, right? A ransom note under a fake name, and you'll get your boy back if you send $12,000, which is a lot of money back then, right?
Oh yeah. That's true. That's what I mean. They used the whole fake name, and they talked to the mother, and they had it all worked out, and the details are in there, and it's very, very well. Like I said, they really thought about this. It wasn't, but the mistake was, again, the body was found that same evening, which was way too soon, and then they identified him quicker than they wanted, and the ransom money too. So there was all these little mistakes, or happenstance, I guess, things that just happened that they didn't plan, because it's really hard to plan out other humans' behaviors around this.
Right. So their so-called foolproof plan fell apart. What happened next?
Well, eventually, after questioning the thing is too, one thing that they did was when they found the body, the person that found the body also found a pair of glasses and turned it into the police, and they eventually traced it to. I believe that was Leopold. And the thing is, because they were in a wealthy circumstance, these were wealthy frames. There was only like 3 pairs made, and they tracked it down to who owned them, so it was his, and then he admitted to owning them. The other thing was the ransom letter was written with a particular typewriter, which also was traced. So when they were kind of confronted with the evidence that they had, they both confessed. So they both confession letters are retyped in there from the original document, so people can see what they actually confessed to. So there you have it. So then they get arrested, and the trial begins.
Right, but those confessions are very detailed. What did you find interesting in each of their individual confessions?
I think probably the most interesting thing about that is the way they handle being interrogated and the way that they confessed. You can actually really pick up their personalities and their feelings. Like you could really tell uh, who had any sort of emotion toward what they had emotion to. It's really unusual. So when you read it, you can actually tell who Leopold is as a person, and you can tell who Loeb is. Like they didn't really hide much about themselves. Um, they did tend to kind of blame the other person, each other, on certain things of the crime. So that's kind of, I guess, typical when two people get caught.
Right, the blame shifting is known, and then minimizing guilt is actually all very common in those.
Yeah, so that part of it's not unusual, but I hope that I put enough of their own conversation and thoughts in that when you read this, you can sort of compare them and understand that who each person was. I think they come across very, very much themselves. There's an arrogance to how they confess and how they talk about it, especially Leopold.
Right, there's an arrogance there, and then they had they did both got psychologically evaluated. Can you talk about their psychological evaluations?
Yeah, with the psych evaluations, I think that it's first of all, we have to remember that back then, alienists, as they were called, and the psychological um, time of the world was fairly primitive. It was fairly new, and there were still a lot of people, like even in the courts and judges and people, that sort of didn't take it as serious as it is now. Like now, it's all important, when they do
Right,
these reports. But back
right,
then, it was kind of yeah, okay, maybe not. It was back and forth, and some people made fun of alienists and stuff like this. But this drew a lot. They had a really strong defense attorney, Clarence Darrow,
right.
who, the Scopes trial and stuff. So he'll live in infamy. But so when he did this, he was a very expression. He had a very I don't know how to call it. He was just very, I don't want to say charismatic, but the lawyer was very out there. Like he would run, jump, cry, scream. He did it all. He was like a stage performer. And he even had oh geez, I'm drawing a blank now. He even had he had the best in psychological testers come out, um, to make his case for his clients. So anyway, so that was, but yeah, what Sigmund Freud was the one.
Oh wow! And so Sigmund Freud's there, and then Scopes is 1 year after this trial, and this is a
Yeah.
huge public event, right? It's press all over the place.
Oh, this was huge.
Yeah.
Hundreds of people outside every day, and they even had to clear the courthouse a few times. I put in a lot of the things that are kind of crazy that were going on around the trial, and kind of how people were acting and reacting and stuff. Because I think it's really important to see the hysteria that was caused by this. And when you go through the papers from then too in the 20s, it's hilarious because there was like 20, 30 articles in every single paper, and you'd have to go through every page because there was so much stuff and talk about this, and whether they should broadcast the trial live on the radio and on WGN radio, and they had a poll going in the Chicago newspaper at the time. It was just I guess it kind of is on the equivalent of some of our big trials that we have these days, with gavel to gavel watching, and stuff like that.
Right.
It's probably much the same.
It feels contemporary. The case
Yeah.
feels like a contemporary case. Like
Oh,
this is
totally. It was salacious in every way. He had everything going on in this, and it was the evil. And you got to, and another, and I hope I got this across, and I don't know if I did enough, but you got to remember with the prohibition going on in the 20s, that there was this real conservative, and there was this real polarizing, sort of like today, where there's this huge, real strong conservative, like no more drinking and religion, and you got to start, and then a real backlash when you have all the young people going around having petting parties, and drinking and wearing weird dresses, and women smoking and cutting their hair short. Like, it was all this controversy. It was just this big thing going on, and then they outlawed alcohol, and yet the rich people were still able to drink. Like, it was just it was a really crazy thing going on in the 20s,
that was
and
the roaring 20s. It really was. There was
it
definitely
really,
a push and pull.
yeah, and that's very important to think about that at the time, because then when you had people outside at the trial, why there was a lot of fights going on outside was because you had the two types of thoughts going on. You had the type of, it's this behavior, this sinful homosexuality that leads to killing people. It's because they're gay that they kill people, and sinners, and all this. And you had that huge push. And then you had, of course, the young people kind of going, "Oh, you're crazy," right? You have this real, not a lot of conversation going on, just a lot of yelling.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a really fascinating case. Is there anything before we wrap this up? Is there anything you'd like to add, or anything I missed before we wrap it up?
Well, I think one of the curious things was later in some of the newspapers, I found the article about the chisel bandit, and it happened before this crime. And you see, it's important to realize that how he Loeb killed the boy was, they had a chisel that was kind of had a handle wrapped on it, and so that he could hit his victim on the head, type thing, kill him, but not cause a whole lot of damage or blood. And so before this crime happened, in the parks where they were, there was two guys going around killing people with a chisel, or attempting to. And the prosecutor at the time was, according to the newspapers, was saying that he thought it was these two kind of working out their plots, working out how they could catch someone and kill them, or or knock them out without the blood and all that. So that they were experimenting with the chisel. So I also put that in the end, because I found that to be really fascinating.
Right. I mean, there's all kinds of other strange things around this case. I mean, just the fact that Clarence Darrow was involved in this too, and Freud and all these other people. Like, there's real psychological depth in this, in how these people thought.
Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy. Now, I did also mention in this, because on the other book with Fritz, there in Berlin, it was the same time, the same kind of murders in a situation, with homosexuals involved. And in Berlin, they had a institute of sexuality, and they would give people passes, so you could be a transsexual, transvestite, and you wouldn't get arrested. And so there became all these big gay cabarets, and it was all the talk of the town. It was really popular. So it was quite the opposite of what was going on in Chicago at the same time. But what ties them is, one of the doctors in that institute went to Chicago and started the first gay protection group, and it was involved in this to an extent. But of course, they didn't have the same feeling in Chicago as they did in Berlin. Like, it wasn't a party atmosphere for them, and gay sex and all that was still awful, and a crime, and put them in jail. It was still very, very disliked in Chicago, whereas in Berlin it was kind of a festive thing.
Interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's still furtive in the States, but in Berlin, more
It was a
set.
it was a party. It's crazy because the atmosphere was so different. Everybody in across the country were going to see these drag shows and going to these gay clubs because it was fascinating and they loved it. It was like the stars all went. Everybody that was everyone was going. It was kind of like in fashion. And meanwhile, in the Chicago, it's completely opposite. So the books go together in that sense because it shows you the different atmospheres in each city's society and how it gets treated in the law. Like it's interesting because it's the exact same time period.
Right, that is interesting. And how do you what's the best place or best means to obtain this book, Leopold and Loeb?
Well, right now it's on Amazon and it's in paperback, hardcover now, and ebook, and so's the other book. They're both out, and they're both going to be available in stores. It's already put through with Ingram Spark, so it will be available in all stores. It got Amazon first.
Gotcha. Well, congratulations. And the best way to contact you if somebody wants to reach out is www.alanrwarren.com, correct?
Yeah, for sure. The website's always the best because it has all of the social media, has the radio show, it has all the books, it has everything to do with that. If it has anything to do with me, it's on there.
Right. So you have all your other books, which I did not list. There are many, like 2 or 3 pages on Amazon alone. So tons of authorship there, tons of books you
Yeah.
can look into, true crime, and then you have a new paranormal book coming out soon, right?
Yeah, the paranormal book should be out. Before Christmas, it should be out. It's in edit process, so if all things go well, it should be out within 2 weeks.
Excellent. Well, that would make a good Christmas present for somebody out there. They can go check it out. Again, the author's name is Alan R. Warren. Title of the book is Leopold and Loeb, Murder of Bobby Franks. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, thank you.
All right, take care. Stay there. All right, cool. So